Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Moby-Dick. I'm David Snyder. I'm the Director of Learning and Community Engagement here at the Peabody Essex Museum. We are so thrilled to welcome you back. My apologies for the rescheduling. I actually slipped on the ice in February and so had knee surgery last month. So it was my fault that we had to shift scheduling, but I'm really appreciative to all of you for joining us again. I'm thrilled to be here tonight. So I'm here, of course, with Dan Lipkin, our Ann C. Pingree Director of the Phillips Library, and we're excited for this penultimate voyage with Moby Dick. You can go to the next, yeah, tonight's course. So just a reminder what we're going to do. So tonight is about chapters 55 through 96. So hopefully you've been able to go through that section. We're focused on that. We're going to do a great session again with Dan about the show, Drama Ishmael, and how it relates to these sections and these chapters. Then we're going to do breakout rooms for about 20, 25 minutes with some prompts that we will give you in just a second to think about and talk about. And then we will bounce back into a large group discussion again about those prompts for about another 30 minutes. And we'll take a look ahead at the very end with the final date of our book club and final business. Thank you, Hugh. I'm wearing my crampons all next year. I keep telling people I'm going to ruin everyone's floors because they're not going to come off. So, spoiler alert. So just a gentle reminder, I have not read the rest of the book, so don't spoil the ending. We're almost there. So we're just focusing on 55 to 96 tonight and trying to dive into this very specific section. And then Lil has wonderfully put up a poll for us. So take a second to take the fun poll, and we'll have reporting back for that later in the session. So shared agreements again about the way that we like to approach these sessions and discussion. So just a reminder that we approach the talks with respect, with good judgment, with openness and curiosity, and with humility. So a prompt or two. Here's a couple prompts to put in your brain as Dan's talking about the wonderful exhibit, Drama Ishmael. So you may have noticed this section deals so much with the intricacies of whales and whaling. There's so much whaling in these chapters, right? Wonderful. Although there's always a layer of metaphor or the universal at play too with Melville. So questions are, how does Melville explore themes of surface versus depth? Dan asked us to think about that last time. So the sense of the surface and then the depth below the surface. How does he play with that? What did you learn or what do you remember about the whaling process from this section? Why do you think Melville included this? And then Melville introduces different ships. How do these ships change or affect the men on the Pequod? Last time in the last section, we had launched into our sea voyage. Now we're on it and we keep running into these different groups and ships. What's Melville's purpose in introducing these other groups of men? And then one other prompt. So after several chapters exploring the experiences of whales and whaling, at the end of chapter 96, if you've read it, hopefully, Melville again invokes the Bible and waxes poetic in a beautiful passage where in part he says, "Give not thyself up then to fire, lest it invert thee, deaden thee, as for the time it did me. There is a wisdom that is woe, but there is a woe that is madness." So what do we think deadened Ishmael for the time? What is he talking about? Why is he deadened? Then what's Melville's meaning and his warning to readers? What is this all about? This is another moment of him breaking the fourth wall and going, hey, remember this, right? After all of this whales and whaling. And then how might this relate to Ahab? The wisdom that is woe, but the woe that is madness. What is Ishmael maybe pointing at with Ahab with this passage? Okay, great. So I will pass it on to Dan, who will give us another masterclass in drama Ishmael and connections with these chapters. Dan, go ahead.
Great. Thanks, David. Really great to be with you all again tonight. It's wonderful that so many of you have come for our fourth session. And I'm really excited to talk to you a little bit about Drama Ishmael and how the exhibition connects with these particular chapters that we've read thus far in this section. So you probably remember that I talked last time in January about how we were going to have a page turn on March 11th and 12th, and that is indeed what happened. We took 2 days when the museum was closed on a Tuesday and Wednesday, and our friends in preparation came in. We met up, and we essentially, what happens is we open all the cases, as you can see happening here, and as a curator, I'm in charge of selecting the different openings that will go on display for the second half of the run of the exhibition. And so all the books need to be turned, and our head preparator, Molly Dennard, is there on the left. Molly is busy strapping down the books in the illustrated exhibition section, or illustrated edition section of the exhibition. You can see the top of the case lying on a blanket there on the floor next to her. And when we turn the pages, that often changes the angle at which the book is happy to be open. So that means that we may have to make adjustments to the cradles that the books sit in. And then at the end, when all of that is done, you can see the blue masking tape there on the around the bases of those cradles. And that's how we kind of make sure everything's aligned and everything is the same distance apart, and everything's in place. Then that tape is removed, and then the bonnet goes back onto the pedestal. And one of the interesting things about this particular layout that our designer created here is there's this big long case in the middle with a lot of the contemporary interpretations, comic books and zines that are more current interpretations and adaptations of the novel. And it takes 5 people there to lift that case off the ground and put it onto the floor, and then back again. And so here you see Kavana, David, Mike, Dan, and Duncan all putting the bonnet back on top of this case. And in Duncan's right hand there, you see kind of a little vacuum. It's like a little vacuum handle that you kind of stick to the glass. There are 4 of those on each corner, and that really helps our crew get a grip on the case so they can lift it over the work safely. You may also notice to Duncan's right, the case that's exposed there. There's actually in the exhibition, there's a wall blocking this end of that case with the introductory panel text. So that wall has to be detached, moved over, so they can get to the case, so they can get to the bonnet and pull it off. And so it really does take a full team to do this kind of thing. We're planning well in advance. So we did a lot of this planning a year ago, in fact, for what would happen on the day of the page turn. And I'm really grateful to all my colleagues at PEM for making this possible, because it's really wonderful to see a whole new set of illustrations and page displays here. So come visit if you haven't already. And if you have, you can see new stuff now. This isn't exactly the exhibition, but you should know that in chapter 56, which is entitled "Of the Less Erroneous Pictures of Whales," Melville talks about 2 etchings by French artist Garneret. And our museum, PEM, has a painting that those etchings were based on, and that is this here. This is a painting by Ambroise Louis Garneret, who died in 1857. This is a painting called "Attacking the Right Whale" from about 1835. It's about 23.5 by 32, 33 inches. It's currently hanging in our maritime galleries, so you can go see it now. And this was a gift made to the museum in 1974. And Melville describes the Garneret etchings as some of the most accurate and evocative images of whaling that there is. And it's really wonderful that we have this painting here in the gallery. And you can also see, in addition to the whale spouting blood, you can also see the try-works on the vessel in the background there, working with the smoke billowing up from it. So it's a really fantastic work. We also have this image from the diorama pop-up by Gerard Lamonaco and Joël Jolivet. This references chapter 67 of Cutting In, where Melville describes how the blubber, how the kind of the rind of the orange of the whale is removed. And this is what you're seeing here. You're seeing the blubber affixed to the blubber hook at the top, and then you're seeing 2 of the crew there with spades kind of peeling the whale, as it were, as it's described in chapter 67. A really wonderful image. And I always think of bacon when I see this. This kind of really, I mean, it's whale meat, obviously. It's not a pig, but it does. The coloring reminds me of bacon quite a bit. A character that is really evocative and quite troubling for me is the prophet Gabriel, who you may remember from when the Pequod encounters the Jeroboam, and Gabriel is kind of this um, possibly prophet who has kind of made the entire crew of the Jeroboam kind of fall under his spell. He tells tales of prophecies, and he predicts sickness and all this kinds of things. And this page is the one on the right here is an image from this 1990 comic book by Bill Sienkiewicz, which I've talked about before, but it's really, I kind of feel like this comic book really focuses on the kind of the dark psychological aspects of the novel, and Gabriel fits that bill. And I particularly love that his right hand here is essentially in the shape of a sperm whale with the thumb pointing up, and almost his pinky finger is the lower jaw of the white whale there. A really evocative image, and kind of uncommon for what you might consider a comic book. So there's an entire chapter, chapter 85, The Fountain, all about the spout of the whale and what is it? Is it water? Is it vapor? Is it air? And that obviously is a common feature of the illustrations of whales, the spout. And so just a few instances of that, particularly in book cover designs here. On the left is is an Italian edition, an Italian binding from 1959. And on the right is the second volume of the Rockwell Kent 1930 edition published by the Lakeside Press, in which this is a very, very Art Deco stylized look of, waves at the bottom, the whale, and then kind of the T shape of the fountain there with the volume number up above the crest of the fountain of the spout. We also have Leroy Neiman, his fountain making an appearance here. This is from the first half of the exhibition, but you see the spout there kind of curling up near the gutter of this image and tailing off to the right. And then this one from 1974 is one of my favorites. This is a London edition by the Folio Society, illustrations by Garrick Palmer. These are wood engravings. And I particularly love the way that Palmer just indicates the whale by the spout that you kind of see a little bit in the distance. This is the opening that's on view right now, and one that I particularly like quite a bit. Mead Schaefer was the artist responsible for the illustrations in the first color illustrated edition of Moby-Dick, and this is the opening that's on view right now. The caption here is "The Malays are after us." And this is a reference to chapter 87, the Grand Armada, where the Pequod is passing through a strait, and it's one where Malay pirates often accost ships, board them, and for piratical purposes. And what's interesting to me is that the caption isn't exactly the story here. The illustration kind of makes it look as if there's a real chase going on, but in the text, it really seems like the Pequod just outruns the Malays, and there's no real encounter with the pirates, which I think is kind of interesting. And we were talking a little bit before we went live here about how dirty and nasty and gory whaling is, and that's made clear through, particularly in this section of the book. And how I really feel that Schaefer's illustrations are a little bit inaccurate because his illustrations don't communicate that, in my opinion. The weather's good. Everybody looks kind of clean, maybe a little bit ragged, but clean. There's not a lot of blood and gore in the illustrations. It kind of makes it look like a kind of a sunny day adventure. The artist Billy O'Callahan has two zines in the exhibition, and one of them, this one here, is called Moby-Dick, Redacted to Queer, in which he has redacted or crossed out all but the queer parts of Moby-Dick. Billy is thinking about the homoromantic and homoerotic aspects of the novel, of which there are many. And there is a vein of scholarship that's looking at Melville and his own sexuality and his own feelings towards other men. And there's also a vein of scholarship in thinking about what went on between men on these boats where they're out at sea for several years at a time with only each other. And so chapter 94, which you may remember, is where Ishmael is working through the lumps of the spermaceti oil, the sperm, and there's this, the squeeze of the hand is the chapter title. And I just kind of love this squeeze, squeeze, squeeze all the morning long. And he's really kind of getting into it and getting lost in the romance and the feeling of it, and kind of attaining this. It almost feels like an out-of-body experience in a way, and I really love this, and I love that Billy has kind of left this particular passage unredacted, as it were. And speaking of Billy, it wouldn't be a talk of mine without some mention of the merchandise related to Draw Me Ishmael and our collaboration with Billy. But we're going to be having a couple of new pieces of merchandise coming out through the shop. And our colleague Victor Oliveira, who's in charge of the shop there, has been really engaged with Billy in developing some additional and fun products. The mug here, we're going to have a few mugs here one of which you can see on the left, and a hat coming out very shortly with rainbows, kind of more of a trucker hat. So I'm excited for those. I'll continue to spend money at the PEM shop. I did mention that, and David mentioned that there's a lot of whaling related content in this section. The Tri-Works kind of finishing up there, chapter 96 in particular, where Ishmael is describing the processing of the blubber and rendering, boiling it down and rendering it into sperm oil. And this page is what's currently on view from a logbook of the Nantucket whale ship Potomac. And you may remember that the Potomac was the whale ship in port in the Marquesas Islands when Melville deserted the Acushnet, which was the New Bedford ship that he was on. And there's a record of that desertion in the Potomac logbook, and that was the first page spread that was on view. But we've turned it to this page from May and June of 1842. And here you see several little tiny illustrations of ships. You also see several illustrations of whales. And these are whales that were hunted and killed by the crews, and you can see how many barrels of oil each of those whales rendered. So for example, in the lower left there's a little kind of white circle with 80. So that whale, they got 80 barrels of oil out of that whale, and so on and so forth. And those letters next to the whales, LB, SB, WB, those indicated the boats that were responsible for initially harpooning those whales. So the larboard boat, the starboard boat, and the waist boat, there was a competition among boats, often on vessels, to see who could take the most whales. And in fact, in the Potomac logbook at the back, there's a chart kind of tracking which boat killed how many numbers of whales. You can also see on the right-hand page there, as indicated by the inset on the right, there's the smoke kind of coming up just like on the Garneray painting. And you can also see the annotations there just above to the right of that, boiling, and then next to Tuesday, finished boiling. So, these ships were working for a long time, cutting down and boiling these whales. It must have been completely dreadful, to be honest with you. I can't imagine how badly that smelled. So that's a little bit about the exhibition and where we are, and I hope you have an opportunity to visit at some point. And we're also glad to hear what you have to say about it, what you think of it. So back to you, David. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Dan. It's so helpful to see those images, to see the paintings of and the book illustrations that demonstrate what we've read about. Because there's clearly like there's a lot of rich imagery throughout this section, and it's really
Mm.
helpful to go, oh, this is a artistic way to see it, to sort of be able to go like, okay, here's a visualization of this to help our brains, right? It helps my brain be like, oh, okay, I see it even a little bit more clearly now through the artist.
Yeah. And I'll also say, I mean, one thing I didn't cover too much here because these pages are not currently on view, but Rockwell Kent and Barry Moser both illustrate the equipment and the processes of whaling quite a bit in their illustrated editions. And in particular, Barry Moser really focuses on that. So there's a ton of that kind of stuff in the Barry Moser Arian Press edition. And if you visit the exhibition, we have the fancy copy in a case that you can't turn. You can't turn the pages, but in the whaleboat in the next gallery, we have a trade copy of that, so you can actually flip through and take a look at what Moser illustrates. And I agree, it's really helpful. And actually, in the back of the Norton Critical Edition, there are some helpful illustrations of as well as what the Triworks looks like and what the equipment looked like.
I love that I'm reading this for the first time in this process, I'll just say, and also just as I'm reading it and realizing even in these 41 chapters, 42 chapters, there's so much imagery that it makes more and more sense to me why you wanted to do this show, like the illustrations and why there are so many variations of artists'
Mm.
conception of what the imagery could be, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I've always thought that it was a real shame that Melville never saw an illustrated edition of Moby-Dick. He died in 1891. The first illustrated edition came out in 1896, 5 years after he passed. And, there were only four illustrations in that particular edition, but his language is so visual and so evocative that it just, I know he would have really appreciated all of the visual work that these artists are doing to interpret his words.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. All right, so let's go to the prompts again before we get into our breakout rooms.
Mm,
Um, Thank you, Dan. So
you're
again,
welcome.
the section deals with so much about whales and whaling, and there's always this layer of metaphor or universal. So, and I will just invite you all too, as we're going through these, just see if any of these resonate with you. That would be the prompt, the moment that you'd want to start with in your breakout room. You're free to start with whatever point or with a different point inspired by these. But as I'm reading them just one more time, just see if anything sparks your interest as like, that's what I want to talk about. So how does Melville explore themes of surface versus depth in this section? What did you learn or what do you remember about the whaling process? Why did Melville include this? What might be the reason that that's there? And then Melville introduces different ships, like the one with Gabriel. How do these ships change or affect the men on the Pequod? What's Melville's purpose in introducing these other groups of men? And then our other prompt, after several chapters of exploring experiences of whales and whaling, at the end of chapter 96, Melville again invokes the Bible and waxes poetic and says, give not thyself up then to fire, lest it invert thee, deaden thee, as for the time it did me. There is a wisdom that is woe, but there is a woe that is madness. Now, in the earlier sections, I feel like we got more practical and poet, practical and poet. Here we had a really long time with practical and experiential and the wailing of it all. And this amazing poetic section then seems like it's teeing us up for the grand finale. Like having not read this, I feel like I'm getting teed up to be like, okay, here we go. Because it's such a gorgeous section after all that wailing. So what do we think deadened Ishmael for the time? What do we think it was that he's referring to? Can we guess? What's Melville's meaning and his warning to readers in this section? And how might this relate to Ahab, the woe that is madness? Okay, so we're going to send you into breakout rooms. The way that Zoom is working today, we're going to have to manually do it. So give us a few minutes. Lil and Corey will be sending you all into breakout rooms, typically of 5 or 6 people at a time. Dan and I will be bouncing around in the breakout rooms. So think about these things and just feel free to spark and start. talking will give us about 20 minutes, and then we'll bounce back into the greater group to talk again and to talk a little bit about what you found in your breakout rooms. Okay, we'll see you on the other side in the small rooms. Okay, we are back.
Okay.
Dan, I see you. I found you. There
I'm
you are.
here. I'm here.
So hopefully we had a great discussion in the room that I was in. Hopefully everybody had a great discussion. Um, just a reminder on the shared agreements that we are talking with respect, good judgment, openness and curiosity, humility. As we go, we'd ask you to raise your hand with the raise hand function if you can. So to use that to raise your hand, and I'll call on folks. And what we'd love to do is just hear from you all. You know, what are some things that you've discovered in your breakout rooms? What are some things that you brought up, or what are some things that you react to the prompts about, or that you feel like, okay, now I have a new thought. Having finished the breakout room, I have a new discovery. So we'll go through and get as many discussion points as we can, and I'll try to keep us moving. The react button. Thank you, Lil. So the react button gives you the chance to raise your hand. And by raising your hand, you'll sort of jump to the front of the queue too, so that we can see you. And I'll call on you by name as we do that. So once you raise your hand, I call on you, then you can unmute yourself, please, and share with us all some thoughts from your group or thoughts that you have in reaction. So go ahead. Anybody want to raise your hand? And if not, I will ask Dan lots of questions.
Don't make me do it. Yeah.
Deborah, I see you.
Hi, thanks. This is just such a powerful book, but uh, when you asked about surface versus depth, the thing that I talked about was in the chapter where the whales, there's the crew is pursuing this pod of whales that forms this ring and creates a lake in the middle, and in the middle in that lake are the cows, I guess, the female whales nursing their babies, and there's this amazing image of that I had of the whalers being able to look down through the depth and see these whales nursing their young and the little babies looking back up at it was just so powerful. So when you asked about depth and surface, that's the first thing that came to my mind.
That's amazing because it's such an amazing point, Deborah, because I feel like I just default to like depth means hell or depth means bad, right? But it's amazing to be like these men are actually, yes, going into the depth, but sometimes seeing glory reflected.
Right.
And we talked in our group a lot about like the ethics of whaling and the way we view it now versus Melville's time. But that complication of like we're doing this thing, but it does in the early passage, in the early parts of this passage reflect the majesty of Wales. And what you're describing too is just the intimacy and the personality
Yeah.
and the family, the schools of Wales, right? Where it's like it's beyond, you kind of get the sense of them being aware on some level that they're attacking a community. They're not
Right.
just hunting an animal.
Right.
Great.
Thanks.
Susan, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because the book can also be seen on these two levels. So there's sort of the strict narrative, we went out, we killed some whales, or you can go down into the depths. And so somebody published sort of an abbreviated version and called it Moby-Dick, which is just the narrative part about, when action is happening. And then somebody was so incensed about that, they did another version. So it's semicolon the whale that has the rest of the book. So when you put them together, you have the whole book. And I agree. It's like those other parts that I really love. So I have to plug a podcast. It's called Higgledy Piggledy Whale Statements. So it's two friends who talk about the book, and each chapter is, you can see it, it's almost like a puzzle trying to figure out what it means. And so I felt when I first read the book, I was like on the surface, and they really took me down to these depths. So just as one example, so cetology is one of the most hated chapters. It's one of the chapters that many people stop reading the book. It's like, this is stupid, whales aren't fish. Why are you telling me this? And he's really, it's, when you learn about it, it's sort of a tongue-in-cheek about how do we classify people. So if you looked at all the people in this group, you could classify us by gender, by education, by political party, by occupation. You know, it's not just one way to classify things. And so, you know, so Melville's saying, yes, there's a scientific classification, but frankly, if you're on the boat in the ocean, saying everything that's below you is a fish kind of makes sense. So that's
Can
why I
you?
really like this, you know, the surface
Yeah,
and the depth. So I really, it's one of the reasons I love the book. I love it when you really get down to the deeper depths.
I love it. Can you say again, is it Higgledy-Piggledy Whale Statements? Is that the name?
Yeah, it's in the Higgledy-Piggledy whales. This is the phrase, it's in the beginning of the book when he has all of these
Okay, but
quotes
that's the
from different
podcast,
places.
right? Just so we can
It's a
find it.
podcast, and they actually
Yeah.
get to they not only get to the entire book, but they review movies, plays, a roller coaster, you know, it's just a
Right.
huge amount of information.
Awesome. Great. Antoinette, I see your hand.
Yes, one thing that came up in our group, it was actually someone else's idea, so I hope I'm not stealing their idea, but I found it so fascinating, is that the similarity between the prophet on the other sailing ship that they encountered and Ahab, that in both cases, the madness of these two had taken over the ship completely, the two ships. And it's kind of a parallel to what's happening now in our world.
I brought up Gabriel in our group too. It's fascinating because I think you're so right that there's a parallel with Ahab where you're like, okay, this ship also is being ruled by this huge personality, this prophet, this seer, and yet this seer is saying, don't go after Moby-Dick, right? Don't do it. It's trying to warn them against it. And in some ways is that sense of like the Archangel Gabriel, the majesty of a prophet, and yet the darkness of the way that he runs his ship, right? And the way that he's running these people. It's a crazy for me, like a funhouse mirror to the Pequod and to Ahab, and the opposite of like this is also a crazy situation, but this person is running away from Moby Dick. These people are chasing Moby Dick, and the two ships are going that way, and they're both in a strange situation, in a strange power dynamic. Great, Arthur, I see your hand.
Yes, I raised a question in our group that kind of relates to surface versus depth and whaling process. And I wonder if anybody on the call tonight got down to New York to the Metropolitan Opera to see the Jake Hedgie opera Moby-Dick. I had wanted to, but just couldn't get away for a trip down to New York in last month. And I thought, from what I had read about it, and it doesn't seem to be a version online of the whole opera, that this was reducing, depth to surface. A whaling process was removed down to a bunch of relationships, duets, trios, Ahab and the Whale, Ahab and Starbuck, Queequeg and Ishmael, to make it opera. So you could have opera, duets, trios, quartets. And I just thought it's an interesting, not illustration in a book, but somebody made a musical composition where you had to condense and pick the pieces. And I guess it got sort of so-so reviews. Music was outstanding, but it was a way to try to grab some of it to get a handle on a little bit. I just wonder if anybody saw it and had any reactions.
Maybe not. It's a very interesting point, like Susan's point about the different narrative versions of Moby Dick, that sense of like an artistic piece being created out of this. And that sense of like, okay, if somebody's going to do something based on Hamlet, are they going to get to Hamlet? If they're going to do an opera of Moby Dick, are they going to get to the depth and breadth of Moby Dick? Or is it always going to feel a little bit like an echo? When you were talking before, it reminded me of Dan's got, an emoji version of Moby Dick that somebody did. The story via emojis. And just wondering if we looked at that, if we looked at the emoji Moby Dick, would that give us a bit of insight into what we're losing in terms of our language, in terms of English language, to be like, if you've just read Moby Dick and then you read the emoji version, what's the gap of experience and understanding when you read just emojis versus reading the text of Moby-Dick. And it's interesting, Arthur, I think it's a really good point that it's in some way like a performance of this is always going to have to distill down and simplify some of the themes and people because it can't do what this book is able to do. And for me, it's almost a reminder of like the power of a book that can't be translated into Netflix, can't be translated into, something else. The world that you get with a book, and are we on the precipice of losing that further? And to Antoinette's point about the world right now, like we really gotta bring books back because it gives you a world in your experience that nothing else does.
The last comment,
Yeah.
it was raised in our group. So how many episodes would Netflix need to do this?
5 seasons, and people would stop. Many people said, the Amy in our group was like, this passage was a real slog. It was hard to do this. It was hard to get through. And audiences today, I think, might get into this, the cytology chapter and be like, I'm out. So, so would they get to the end? I don't know, but yeah, it would be a great like 5-year series. Elizabeth, I see your hand.
I wanted to speak to this issue of the opera because I actually did attend it. And it's a mediocre American opera. I think it's worthy. It was really well performed. It was exceptionally well staged. But because of some of the reasons that we've talked about, it just doesn't work. It's too reductive. It reduces the story to a number of interpersonal confrontations. And some of them are well done, like Starbuck versus Ahab, but a lot of them are kind of stupid, like Queequeg and they call Ishmael Greenhorn. And they make out that they have a sort of almost Sesame Street level friendship and they're just looking for a sense of belonging. And it was really a bunch of hokum. And also, I think an opera from Moby-Dick would really need a great composer. And Jake Hedgie is not a great composer. You really need like Wagner, or you need one of the great sea composers like Rimsky-Korsakov. You're not
Yeah.
going to get it with Jake Hedgie. So it was kind of a good try. And I think there is a DVD available of the first production, which was largely this one, done in 2013, I think in Houston. But it may be out of print, but people who are interested could probably run it down.
Mm. Thank you, Elizabeth. It's a really good point that it feels like if anything's going to get close to this, it maybe has got to be through the music, right? Like music is maybe the only form I could think that could give you some feel or experience of Moby Dick, because a few characters speaking for 2 hours or acting for 2 hours is going to be so compressed always. It's always going to be simplified to the point of mockery almost. Okay, Hugh, I see your hand.
Yeah, we toward the end of our conversation, we touched on the end of chapter 96. And it occurred to me a little bit about the fact that the hero, like Odysseus, has to like descend into the underworld before coming up again and being a hero. And I think it reminds us a little bit of that Catskill eagle that can dive down into the blackest scourges and then become invisible in the sunny spaces, which sounds a little bit like Dickinson. But we loved that. And we also talked a little bit about the fact that before Howard Schultz named Starbucks, he was going to name it Pequod's Coffee.
Wow. Really? Wow. I think he
I'm not sure
landed
I'd
on
go
the
there. Yeah.
he landed on the quicker, better jingoey name, right? A little bit quicker, Starbucks. Did you guys talk at all? We talked about the deadening that he talks about in himself, Ishmael. Did you guys talk about that at all, Hugh? Like what is the deadening?
Only obliquely, just, and a little bit about like all the ships they encountered and how it just threw into sharp relief how the Pequod was just outside the social order, and Ahab, just his madness kind of infiltrated and that kind of darkness, but no more.
Got it. Bronwyn, I see your hand.
Hey, my camera's not functioning, so I apologize. But
Okay.
so the issue of Service and Death, I immediately just thought of the Castaway chapter with Pip. I don't know precisely what it was because, there's so much rich language in the book, and sometimes I have trouble paying attention. But like, I just that chapter just captivated me, and it's just the description of him falling overboard and going under. But there's this notion of him. I mean, I already read it in our previous session, so I don't want to read it again. But again, just that language of him sinking to the bottom, but like the world just kind of opening up to him and him seeing all these wonders, and it is just, I just love that chapter so much. I can't stop thinking about it, and just all the things that it touched on, including the fact that there's a line that says like Pip's shipmates called him mad, and this notion of his madness versus those of like Ahab and the other leaders. And madness can also be freeing in the sense that he saw all these aspects of creation, and anyway, just to have that just as a sorry uh, different perception of what madness can be in a different context. So
I think it's such an amazing, I'm glad you brought it up. I brought it up in our group. As you're saying it again, I find it like really haunting and moving, that chapter. And as you were describing it again, it just made me think what I hadn't thought before of like the way they say that when you're drowning, it's really quiet. Right? That it's kind of quiet and there's some simplicity to it. And I just wondered in our group if after all the wailing, all the harrowing stuff that they're doing, if that experience of Stubb letting him behind is just this sense of they're all losing their souls doing this work, in turning away from somebody like Pip, and that sense of like, what are you losing or abandoning? And it's such a grace note in the musicality of Melville too, where it's a sort of sense of like all this onslaught of stuff, and then this just very simple human experience of they've left me behind, and him being marked by that, and not being the same afterwards. Um, the way that Melville sets us up for that as an audience is just pretty extraordinary. The simplicity of that versus the busyness of all the stuff that's come before. And that's to me too one of those things where like we've had to spend the time experiencing all those other chapters. So by the time we get to this thing, it's different than if it were in a 2-hour opera. It's like we've spent so much time in these other experiences, and then it can wallop us with the serenity, beauty, and horror of that moment. Gene, I see your hand.
Sorry, David,
Yeah.
can I just jump in here real quick?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, Dan. Yeah.
Just to say on that note, Susan had mentioned in the chat about the puppetry Moby-Dick that had happened at Emerson down in Boston. And I recall that particular scene actually was one of the most striking things I have seen in any production, where you have the ships moving and chasing the whale, and then Pip goes overboard, and then suddenly the entire stage rotates, and suddenly you're seeing Pip from overhead in this vast ocean. And it was just such a striking image, in the same way that I think that scene hit you in reading it. That has really, really stuck with me as far as one of the visual interpretations that I've seen of the book that was just so special. But sorry, Jane.
No, that's
No,
amazing,
that's
Dan. I
right.
think it's one of the things too about when we're talking about performance of Moby Dick. It's like it feels like one of the things you can do in performance is decide which moments you're really going to bring to life.
Right.
Bring them to life. Know that it's all too much. You can't do all of it, but I'm going to go there and I'm going to use the design and the way that it's shaped to like wallop us. That's kind of amazing. Gene, go ahead.
Well, I wanted to raise the issue of why they're whaling. And, this is, in some ways, this is like a book about war. And you hear often these same themes that occur in war, the beauty and the horror and the camaraderie and the terror. But then they're not at war, they're just wailing, in a sense. That this is important to them, they make their living doing this, their communities are supported by it, but what is the whaling for? And I had really earmarked in chapter 81, I believe it is, where he's talking about meeting the Virgin. The Pequod meets the Virgin, but and they kill this very old whale.
Yeah.
And then on page 270, he says, but pity there was none. For all his old age and his one arm, meaning the whale, and his blind eyes, he must die the death and be murdered, in order to light the gay bridals and other merrymakings of men, and also to illuminate the solemn churches that preach unconditional inoffensiveness by all to all. And several times he brings this up, this question of, well, what's this whaling for? What did they, they support themselves with it. They support their families. He's obviously has a lot of respect for the men who are whalers. But in the end, what is it for? Bridal outfits and perfumes and light and that sort of thing. It's really for superficial nothingness almost. And I think that contrast, he doesn't pull it in as much as I was expecting, especially in the chapter about Pip and kind of the woe that he feels. But I think this must be part of it. There's nothing in it he can justify saying, well, like a war book, well, supposedly we're protecting the country or we're fighting enemies or things. This is just whaling so people can smell good and look good, and be able to see each other at night.
Yeah, that's an amazing point. Somebody in our group too brought up the point of like when we went from like the sperm oil to oil in the land, and then that discovery and then that focus. And there is that kind of sense of like, but what's it all about? Where are we trying to get to? How have we gotten better? Because now there's this resource and this resource and this resource. I think it's an amazing point, Gene. And I think one of the things that struck me too in this passage is that sense too of like Ishmael is a bit of a passenger in all this. Like he kind of has the choice to observe. He's there as a researcher almost openly through this experience. It seems that he doesn't necessarily have to be there. So he's able to think these things and have a view sometimes that is a little bit distant on what all this is. Susan, I see your hand again. Do you have a new thing?
Yeah, so Jean was in my group and she also brought up the issue, like what does Ishmael/Melville really think of whales? Does he love whales? Because he does bring up, like when they're in the circle and with the mothers and how beautiful it is. And so in the book, there's this dichotomy between the Pequod and Ahab, which they're black and they're on the sea and the fire's burning. It's like sort of like this hell ship. And then you have this white whale, and is the whale the monster? Is the whale good? And personally, Moby-Dick is my hero. I think he's sort of the God figure in the book. And so what I thought was interesting with Pip, when Pip goes into the depths of the ocean, he actually sees God with his hand on the treadle of the loom. And so it's sort of like as you go deep into the ocean, that's sort of where heaven is. That's where God is. That's where, so I think that adds to my argument that Moby-Dick is actually the hero of the book and not a monster. And I think as we discussed, I think Melville had a lot of respect for whales, and certainly for his time that just even thinking about worrying that they might not exist at some day.
I'm so glad you said that. It's such an amazing point. And it reminds me of earlier in this passage too, when Melville's talking about like the brain of the whale and trying to kind of wonder, like, what do they think? How do they experience? Like, what is that like? Trying to get into the mystery of like, what is a whale? What does it mean? How do they experience the world? And it just strikes me like, what if they at some point would face the fact that they're hunting God? You know what I mean? Like if you kind of went like, oh, we're actually like trying to destroy a god on this planet, and having the realization of that, of flipping like, oh, I'm not going over a lesser thing. I'm actually attacking something that has wisdom of the ages. And that's a bad idea to be hunting that, right? Even if you have physical power to do it.
I think so. And I think when people read the last 3 chapters, they should think about that. I'm not going to say anything. I'm just saying, keep that in mind.
I'm just telling you, something might happen in the sequel. No, I'm looking forward to it. I mean, I think one of the things that's amazing about this book too is I'm actually looking forward to discovering all the majesty of the end. Karen, I see your hand. And then I think Chris Griffin might have had your hand up if you still have something. But Karen, what do you?
I want to go back to this war, this sort of use of this war metaphor, and I think certainly the Grand Armada is a chapter that exemplifies that. But I just want to go back to, I think it's the beginning of the chapter called The Crotch, where Melville introduces this humor about if books' greatness be measured by numbers of chapters, it's something to that effect. I'd have to go back to look it up. But the Grand Armada is one of the longer or length of chapters too. You know how there's these short chapters and long chapters. But the very beginning of the Grand Armada, just the use of ramparts, sally ports. There are all these military words that go around, and just the whole theme of that chapter, I think, emphasizes this warlike approach to what they're doing. And one of the, I know I keep on referring, as I did in the small group, to just quoting these passages, but I just love this one. Talking about well, this part of the world, Malacca, and then all the silk and the spices and all these treasures that it's the Caesar, the Oriental Caesar enriched. It seems a significant provision of nature that such treasures by the very formation of the land should at least bear the appearance, however ineffectual, of being guarded from the all-grasping Western world. I mean, and that even alludes to why do we do whaling? We just want everything. There's this age-old consumerism that we have. The Western world wants all the riches of the Eastern. I thought that was a powerful statement. So.
Yeah, no, I'm amazing. I'm glad you read that. And now it's the planet Mars, right? That's what's next for us. We must have other planets now that we've mapped everything. It is that sort of sense of like the never-ending avarice, or the never-ending like thinking that there's something next instead of here.
Instead of gratitude and contentment.
Yes. Yeah. And recognition of things that are greater than us, maybe. Great. Dan, I have a question for you. If others don't have a hand, we have a few more minutes.
I saw Alice with her hand, like her literal hand raised.
Okay, great. Alice, where are you? I don't see you because
Here I am. I can't find my button tonight. I don't know. I'm having a
okay, great. There you go.
But I'm here, upper left-hand corner on my machine. I just wanted to say that there are 2 kinds of whales. I'll add a little bit of nonfiction. The baleen and the oil. Thank you. The baleen was used for everything that you can think of that plastic is used for now. So it was an important industry because it made buggy whips, it made the hoops for the skirts, it made the whalebone corsets, it made all kinds of things came from the baleen whales. Then if we transport ourselves back to the early 1800s, light, you wanted to have some light. And yes, the farmers, everybody made candles, but there were candles that dripped and candles that went out quickly. And then there were wonderful sperm oil, tallow and things from the whale that really improved the quality of life. And then finally you get the oil. This was the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and people used the pure sperm whale oil to lubricate parts in the machines. So I add that piece to history.
No, that's great. Thank you for taking us back to the practical, because there is that sense of like there were practical reasons for this, and there's a reason why it was such an industry and such a necessity at the time.
It's also, a horrible place to work on a whale ship. You either were bored out of your mind or you didn't stop working all night with the try works and stuff. These men really were incredible.
Yeah.
Go off on a whaling ship. Bye, honey. Bye, kids. I'll see you when I see you. Miraculously, they would come home.
Yeah.
But
And back to like Jean's point about war, it seems
yeah,
right. We're going off to the harrowing experience to help move the world forward.
right.
At what costs? Yeah.
So thank you to everybody.
Yeah, thank you. So that's a great note to end it on. Dan, if you'll bring us back to our slideshow, we'll wrap this up. I have to say it's been another amazing conversation. I enjoy these sessions so much, and I am sad that we have one more only. So we're looking ahead. So we're using the Norton edition, which I think everybody has got and is keyed into. The last voyage is June 18th. 97 through the epilogue, chapters 97 through the epilogue. Wednesday evening, June 18th. We'll have a lot to talk about as we figure out as I'm experiencing the ending for the first time. And then Dan, you can go to the next one. So things to think about. Dan's talking about obsession. You want to do this, Dan? Go
Yeah,
ahead.
just really quickly. I mean, I think thinking about how Ahab's obsession grows and intensifies over the final portion of the novel. The fate item is thinking about, I'd like you to think about how the prophecies and the visions that we've read about in this and earlier parts of the novel, how do those manifest itself? How do those impact on the fates of the people involved in the narrative or not? And as far as the human condition is concerned, as this book kind of unspools towards its conclusion, how does Melville address and tackle what it is to be human, right? What the physical, the spiritual, the emotional, and the social aspects of being alive, and how does that come through in what Melville is writing and how he takes us through the end of the novel?
I'm going to be sad for it to end. As robust a book it does feel like I'm getting connected to it. I will go back to it someday, and it feels like one of those things where I'm like I'm not ready to face the ending quite yet. I will be by June, hopefully.
Well, and something that's come up in a lot of the breakout rooms that I've been in is that, it'll still be there for you. And every time you read it, like there's some other aspect that makes itself apparent to you or that you catch in a different way. And that's one of the hallmarks of a great work of art.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, having had my leg in a brace these last like 6, 7 weeks, I have a connection to Ahab that I didn't have before. Luckily, mine is hopefully temporary, but I have that sense of rage and inequity. But it's been strange to have this experience. So Lil dropped in the chat and here on the slide, this Monday, the Whale Mobile is returning to PEM. So that is free with admission, but you do need to get tickets for 30-minute slots. It's an amazing experience. My daughter and I did this last summer. It'll be, I think, again, an EIMH, an East India Marine Hall in PEM. It takes you into a blown up whale. And what was struck me is that it's really the amount that you learn about whales in the experience is really great too, that you're really taught. The facilitators are educators. And so they really demonstrate and talk a lot about whales and the biology of whales. So especially if you have young people, it's a great thing to bring them to. And then we're doing another whale watch, which Dan, I think you're doing again, maybe. You're going on the whale watch. So Saturday, April 26th, and tickets are on the PEM website. So I did that as well, I think in August, and it was amazing, super fun. We saw some whales and we saw an amazing school of dolphins. So join us for that if you can, because it's an amazing way to kind of get that experience while we're having this experience at the same time. So I think that's it. We will see you Wednesday, June 18th, 2025. And we will reveal then too the prize that you're getting if you've gone through this whole journey with us. It's been an amazing year. I can't believe that it's going to be over in a few months. And I will point to the fact that in 2026, we're going to do a series similar to this around a new book called Salem Stories that's coming out of the faculty at Salem State University that will be a 4-session process throughout 2026. exploring the different centuries of Salem's history. So we'll look forward to doing that, and we'll be sending out a lot more information about that. So, but we will see you in June. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Lo and Corey, and thank you all for being here again. So smart, so insightful. I enjoy so much connecting with you all, and you make this a total joy, I think, for Dan and me and everybody at PEM because of what you bring to it, the care and the insight. And so see us again at the show while it's still here. We got until March of next year, but come back to Drama Ishmael if you can. Thank you all. See you soon.